So thank you. It's my honor to introduce Governor Greg Mendoza, and Governor Mendoza is not only a visionary leader, but he was one of the young, and one of the reasons I wanted him to be on this panel is because he was one of the young leaders that came to NCAI and actually instituted and helped us develop NCAI's Youth Commission. So about 15 years ago, Greg Mendoza would have given us the kind of speech that Megan gave us here today of hope in the future of our youth, but he's a living example of the investment in our youth and what it does as he steps in to the footsteps of his ancestors as leading his tribe. So Greg Mendoza, welcome, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to all. First of all, I just want to say thank you to the National Congress of American Indians for coordinating this discussion to develop a collective vision for our priorities over the coming years. I think these conversations are very helpful in determining what our priorities should be. I think it is useful to have an ultimate goal. For me, as a tribal leader, that ultimate goal is what I envision my community should look like. I want my community to be one where our culture and our language are strong and rich, where our tribal members are employed and have adequate housing that is not overcrowded, where our people are healthy and crime is low, and where our tribal government is self-sufficient and not reliant on the federal government. As a tribal leader, it is my ultimate goal, and that this vision is what guides my priorities. It is with that vision in mind that I come here this morning to raise some specific topics for us to consider discussing as potential priorities for the coming years. Before I talk about the specific ideas, I think it's good to reflect on all that we have accomplished over the past few years. We were finally able to get Congress to make permanent and modernize the Indian health system after more than a decade of efforts. We'd worked with Congress to enact the Law and Order Act. This bill empowers our tribal governments to improve public safety on Indian lands. We did such a good job that the Obama administration advocated for additional tribal provisions within the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. We need to get these provisions enacted into law. We were also able to get the longstanding Cobell class lawsuit and more than 41 tribal trust mismanagement lawsuits against the federal government resolved. We worked with Congress to enact legislation to finally allow us to approve our own land leases. We got President Obama to sign an executive order on education that established the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education. And we got President Obama to support the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. All of these things are what we, working as a collective body here today, were able to accomplish over the past few years. These accomplishments happened because we developed a unified vision on these issues and worked with the President and the administration to have these laws enacted and actions taken. Those efforts started with conversations like the one we're having this morning. Today's discussion is critical to our efforts over the next few years. Empowering and educating our Native youth. I propose for our first topic the need to empower and educate our Native youth. While many of our activities are often focused on solving the problems that exist today, we don't spend enough time and energy on preventing the problems in the first place. Our youth are our future tribal leaders, but they are also our future criminals, substance abusers, victims of crimes. If we do not adequately invest in them now and today, I believe that over the next few years, We should focus on developing strategies and improving laws that will help empower and educate our youth. First, I think we need to include our youth and more in our dialogue what our priorities should be. I'm honored to share the stage with Megan Gregory, who is definitely a future tribal leader in the making. As a former youth advisor, coordinator, I know that there are more Megan Gregorys out there, and we need to find them, empower them, and include them in our dialogue. The National Congress of American Indians Youth Commission is a great entity, and one that the Youth Council from my community was involved in establishing. But I think we could do more at the local level to encourage our youth to get involved and stay on the right path. I find that local youth councils that have strong relationships with their tribal governments can often provide meaningful ideas that are productive for the entire community. The Gila River Indian Community's Youth Council is here today and engaged in this dialogue. I would like to recognize them at this time and ask that they stand. And if there's any other young people here representing your tribes, please stand. Our young people. These young people are our future. I challenge each tribe in this room to go back and create a youth council in your community and to bring them with you at the next annual convention of the National Congress of American Indians. We also need to ensure our education system works better. Tribes are unique in that our students are educated in a variety of schools that are controlled by tribes, the federal government, state governments, and private entities. This variety makes it harder for cooperation that exists amongst various schools. Moreover, the tribal governments have a limited role to play in how these schools perform and function. We need to ensure that there are more cooperation between these types of schools that educate our youth, and the tribal governments play a greater role in how our youth are being educated and those schools being held accountable. The federal education laws will be likely reconsidered by Congress next year. We need to be prepared to be engaged in that conversation early on. We also need to do a better job in identifying the problems our youth face at an earlier stage so that we can better address them. I support early and routine school-based assessments, and I think we should push them to make them mandatory. As tribal leaders, we can't merely rely on educators to solve the problems of our youth. We need to be intimately involved as well. And I challenge all of the tribal leaders in this room to become more engaged in the education of our youth. The protection and revitalization of native languages and cultural resources. We also need to protect and revitalize our native languages and cultural resources. We as Indian people lose our identity if we lose our languages and culture. For decades, federal policies and attitudes of the largest society discouraged us from maintaining our culture and languages. More recently, we have been focused on economic activities such as gaming to bring our people out of poverty. But we must never forget our culture and language. It is the foundation of who we are as a people. Individually, numerous tribal governments are establishing programs to help preserve and revitalize native languages and culture. In some instances, tribes are working with colleges and universities to teach native languages. These are good steps to ensuring the preservation of our communities, but I think we could do more. I think we can push for a federal policy that really promotes the revitalization of our languages. Whoever the president is after November 6th should consider issuing an executive order to preserve and revitalize our native languages. I think we should push more federal funding for programs to help with native preservation. The existing federal law authorizing native language and programs expires this year. Yet, bills to reauthorize those programs are just introduced last month. We should consider more action to protect our cultural resources and sacred sites. Many of our resources and sites are located on federal lands and are often threatened by development, tourism, and simply a mindset by federal officials that our access and use of these resources are no more important than non-natives. We need concrete federal policies and laws that protect and streamline our access to these sites and resources. Housing. We cannot continue to have strong cultures if we don't have adequate housing. Housing impacts the level of crime in our communities, the mental health of our members, and the motivation of our youth to live healthy lives and become productive citizens. Yet, in much of Indian country, our housing is woefully inadequate and there is insignificant unmet needs. The federal laws authorizing funding for Indian housing programs expire next year. Rather than merely reauthorize these programs, I would encourage us to have a dialogue on how these programs can be changed to better suit our needs. These programs are often cumbersome and burdened by federal administrative bureaucracy. In my community, our ability to utilize our federal housing funding is often hampered by the bureaucracy within the federal agencies. In 1970, President Nixon sent a historic message to Congress on tribal self-determination. This message led to what was often considered one of the most successful federal programs in tribal governments, the Indian Self-Determination and Self-Governance Act. I recognize that every tribe has different levels of administrative capacity, and self-determination looks very different for every tribe. But I think it would be prudent for us to discuss whether tribal governments should be able to access federal funding for housing in a manner similar to how we are able to access funding through self-governance compacts and contracts. If self-determination and self-sufficiency is a goal, then we should look to streamline more federal programs and increase our flexibility to use federal funding. Economic development is always a discussion topic at many of these conventions. The need for tribal governments to grow our local economies is very critical. I encourage us to look to our youth as being critical components of our future economies. Many of our youth are very entrepreneurial, innovative, and up to date on the latest technology. They are great candidates for developing small businesses, yet they lack the mentoring, the guidance, and the advice to do so. We should always look in which to provide them with the resources they need to help our economies expand. A key component is the need to make sure that our tribal members and youth are financially literate. Often we don't learn the basic financial skills well into our adulthood, and often we've made several mistakes that negatively impact our credit. We are also to expand our tribal economies. We have to have more financially literate business owners and consumers. Additionally, we cannot have strong economies and utilize the latest technology if we don't have the adequate telecommunications infrastructure. The federal government should actually play a critical role in this issue and should try to strengthen tribal provisions in the federal communication laws. We need to access funding mechanisms and technical assistance and more authority to build out our technological infrastructure. Lastly, we need to remind Congress and the administration that we are governments and need to be treated as the same as other governments. That means we should be able to develop our energy resources in the same manner as state governments and not be overburdened by the federal bureaucracy. We can create our own tribal bureaucracy if we deem it necessary to protect our interests. And tribal governments should have equal access to federal programs and funding wherever state governments are included as eligible entities. So we need to advocate changes to the federal laws to ensure that we have equal access, and we should be treated as governments within the federal tax code. We should be able to levy taxes within our lands to the exclusion of any state taxes. And we should be able to fully utilize tax-exempt financing. I believe we have an opportunity over the next few years to make some changes and progress on all of these issues. The level of that progress will depend on how many advocates and supporters that we have in Congress and the administration. Thus, I will conclude my remarks by encouraging all of us to become more politically active at both the state and federal level. And I help to educate our membership of what political candidates have our best interests in mind and to get our members out to vote on the elections. There have been several instances over the past decade where the Native vote have made an impact on the result of political races. I think we can make a difference in these upcoming elections as well. Thank you for the opportunity to raise these topics today, and I look forward to further dialogue about our collective priorities for the coming years. Thank you.
Governor Mendoza, we want to thank you for that strong vision, commitment, and leadership that you have always provided to Indian country, and the importance of the role of tribal government in playing and ensuring the quality of life and circumstances of living for all tribal members. Thank you.